Hey everyone. So this is normally where we do our very glib and very irreverent introduction because we're an irreverent crew here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. But we realized that Monday fell on, well, not realized, but Monday fell on a Memorial Day this year. And so we're putting, actually it's every year, but anyway, we're putting the episode that would normally air on Monday, we're going to air it on Wednesday because we just felt like that was the respectful thing to do. Nick and I both, while Doc is a veteran too, Nick and I both served overseas, and not only were we know people, because you don't have to have been to war to know combat veterans who died, but we were there for some of those moments, and we lost some of our friends that way. So for us, it's sort of a special day, like Veterans Day for us. So first off, if you see a veteran, don't thank them for their service, thank their friends for their sacrifice, because that's what it's about. Like for me, it's the day I commune with the ghosts. I mean, they're there every day, but it's a more purposeful ritual, I guess, on days like this.
Yeah.
So what I can tell you that I've learned from 2 years in a combat zone and losing, like I'm the last member of my squad left alive. They didn't all die in the first deployment. We had people redeploy to Afghanistan after our deployment almost immediately, and they didn't leave the Korengal Valley. Some of them, the peace was harder than the war for some of them, and they ended it themselves. And I would still count those as combat deaths.
Yeah.
But so for me, it's that special moment. But what about you, Nick? I know you've talked about this pretty publicly yourself. I actually have talked to the families of the people in the units or people that I lost, and they've specifically asked not to because they don't want that limelight. They're kind of the salts of the earth, just want to go about their business kind of people.
Right.
So while many of you are doing your grill and your barbecue thing, I'll be driving the annual pilgrimage to talk to one of the sons of a guy I served with who never got to meet his dad. And so I kind of go, he was a stereotype. Married the stripper. He was married for a hot minute when he deployed while she was pregnant. And I'll say, I don't know if in life their marriage would have stayed true, but she's honored him in his death, and that's respectable.
Yeah.
And since her experience with him was so limited, and he was a product of the what do you call that, the child, no, the system where you send the kids with no families, the foster system. There we go. He was a product of the foster system, so he didn't really have any family that he can ask about his dad. And so while I didn't know everything about his life story, I knew enough that I can teach his son the kind of man his dad was. So every year we sit, we crack a beverage, and we just we talk, and I tell those stories. And at this point, he could probably recite them back verbatim. It's not like it's anything new, but it's the ritual that matters,
That you're absolutely right. It is the ritual that matters, and it's a good ritual to have. It's just shitty or it's crap that some tragedy had to happen to have that kind of ritual.
Yeah, it's one of those things that that people have asked me why I did, because I actually, during the COVID, I was sneaking out and breaking state ordinances about gatherings and stuff to do it. And someone asked me why I bothered or why I would risk it, because I have my own kids to consider. And I don't know that Virginia was actually actively enforcing it. I know the rules were on the books, but it didn't matter because it's like you and I have said off air that some promises are eternal, and they'd have done the same thing for us.
Absolutely.
So it's sort of, and the other thing is I really believe this, that as long as we keep their memories alive, they're not really dead. I believe people die twice: the day you actually leave your earthly body, and then the day your memories are no longer around, right? So if I can keep,
that's like a Greek saying. It's like you don't, you die twice. You die when you pass away, and then the last time your name is spoken.
Yes.
Can't remember the original quote, but it's something akin to that, and I fully believe in that. That's why, like with my family, I became kind of like the family historian. So, like when my grandmother was still around, every time I went to go see her, hey, tell me your life story. How'd you meet Grandpa? How did that all go down? Things like that. She has a pretty cool story. She worked for the War Department during World War II in Chicago.
Okay.
She had a very
So for
interesting life.
me, I try to remember, and Patton was a blowhard about a lot of things and gave some motivational speeches. Some of them he's been credited for, he didn't actually say, but the movie was so iconic. But
Yeah, yeah,
one of the quotes that he had that was actually him was when he talked about our war dead was that, and I'm pulling this up because I didn't want to mess it up. He said it's foolish and wrong to mourn the men who died. Rather, we should thank God that such men lived.
yeah,
And that's sort of kind of how I view it because
yeah.
I feel like I'm a better man for having known them.
Oh, absolutely.
And so one of them, and I'm using his nickname, we called him Whitey because he's a pale kid from Boston. And what else are you going to call a guy who's bleacher than bleach and whiter than me? And my drill sergeant told me I was the founding father of the bleach people at basic. So, and this guy made me look, I don't know, like he made me look like I had a tan, right? Like
Oh, well,
he's just the short little Irish kid from Boston with an
that's a whole
attitude. And
kind of white.
yeah, that's a whole lot of white. He had the Napoleon complex, something fierce.
See, a
So I
short kid.
remember, yeah, the short kids always
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
They're extra mean to compensate. And
Yes.
so I remember vividly one of the times we were leaving BIOP, which is the Baghdad International Airport. And Whitey happened to be out front, and he bumped into a bunch of Navy SEALs in their silk whatever shorty shorts, and they were wearing their PT gear, and of course the iconic sunglasses that all SEALs, I think they get issued them when they graduate
Oh,
buds.
please, yeah,
Yeah. And so he bumped into him, and the guy was like 6'2". He was taller than me, and I'm 5'9".
yeah.
And Whitey just shoves him like, "Watch where you're going, asshole!" But he does it in this thick Boston accent. We used to always make him tell us he was parking his car in the Harvard yard. But so he
Yeah,
pushes
oh,
the
yeah,
guy, and there's so it was 2 gun truck crews. So there was 3, 6, 9. There was 18 of us and about 7 or 8 of them, all totaled. And so of course we were outnumbered because they did that shit for a living, and we were just, you know what I mean? Like I
yeah,
could hold my own in a scrum. I played rugby, but it's entirely different because I learned where there were rules of conduct, and anybody in the special operator community knows the only rule is not to die.
yeah. Don't lose.
Don't
Find a
lose.
way to
And
win.
so he bumped into them and he wouldn't let it go. And so in the infantry, you have this rule: if all of your guys come back and there was a fight, a bar fight, whatever, and you're the only one without a bruise, you better either be Jackie frickin' Chan or you're in trouble, because that means you didn't stick up for you and yours, right? Because
Exactly.
like I might have hated some of them with a passion, but when it came down to it, those were my brothers, not yours. So screw you.
Yep.
And it's sort of like if you've got siblings that like you can call them all the meanest names in the book, but God help them if someone else does it.
Oh, yeah.
So he
Like there's.
bumped into the SEALs and he wouldn't let it go. So we had one guy that was recovering from a broken arm. Not so
Mhm.
bad he couldn't deploy or he couldn't go into the field with us, but bad enough I didn't want him to get hurt again. So
Yeah.
we sort of stacked rifles like we haven't since boot camp and the fight was on.
Oh shit.
Um, I have the privilege of giving one of them a bloody nose before I got my clock cleaned. So that was
Well,
something at least.
hey, tiny
Um,
victory, man.
yeah, you got to take what you can get. And when it was over, like the MPs showed up, whoever was security for Baghdad that day for BIOP,
Yeah.
um, showed up and broke it up, and they pulled me up because I was a senior person for the gun truck for the Army guys. Like, what
Yeah.
the hell happened here? And I'm like, oh, they were teaching us hand-to-hand combat tactics because like if it's the enlisted versus the officer, screw that lieutenant, right? Like
Yeah.
we'll handle it ourselves like
We got
men.
this. Yep.
And so they were impressed enough that I didn't throw them to the wolves because they thought, oh, for sure it's over, we're done, right?
Right.
But they took us to their compound. They souped up my rifle, added a few extra. Their armor added some extra lands and grooves to the barrel. I
Nice.
don't know if he did it manually or if he just switched the barrel out. I never asked. It's one of those sometimes you just don't want to know.
Yeah.
Um, but they did some modifications to our equipment, and they treated us nice for a day. And I have to say, those they ate a lot nicer than we did in the defects.
Oh yeah.
It is. But that was Whitey for you, always starting fights because he was compensating. He's the one, if you've heard us talk before about starting the fights with the Marines out of Anaconda, they were
Yeah.
doing PT and their silk nasties, and he started running laps around their formation, screaming, "Who wears short shorts?" Insert a Q word for derogatory slang for homosexual individuals. It was a different time, people.
It
They
was
wear
just.
short shorts. Yeah, and the fight was on, as they say. But that
And
was
that's.
Whitey. He was always looking for trouble. Never met a fight he didn't want to engage in.
Yeah.
He probably gave me my first gray hair, but damn, I didn't love that kid. He was the one when the day that your Reaper team pulled us out of the shit outside of Anaconda. He was the one in the turret deciding if the helicopters didn't want to acknowledge the combat, he was going to shoot at them with the 50 to get them to realize there was a firefight. And I had to like manually drag his. I mean, I get
That's
in
a
the
bad
adrenaline moment,
idea.
it makes sense, but you don't want to be the one pointing because they've got automated
No.
systems that say, "Oh, they're shooting at us. They must be the bad guy."
Yeah, that's aerial
So that
combat or
was
aviation combat.
yeah. So that was Whitey, and he was one of the ones. Him and his buddy that they enlisted on the buddy program together. They
Yeah,
as soon as we got home, like literally within 2 months, they were back redeployed in Afghanistan, and they just danced with death one too many times, and they didn't make it home.
yeah,
And so, it's for me, I always remember him as the kid he was. And sometimes you look in the mirror and you're like, holy shit, I got old. But in your head, they're still eternally young because they
yeah,
didn't get the privilege of being old. They didn't get to raise a family. They didn't get to look at their first child be born, never got to argue with some idiot on the interstate because, I mean, let's face it, even a traffic jam's a luxury from where they're laying.
yeah.
So for me, today is about one, honoring their memory and where possible, seeing their family, and making a life that they would be proud of.
Absolutely.
What about you?
That's same reasons. They didn't get a chance to grow old like I did, and so I live for them. Every day. Try to do right. Try to be a good man. Try to be the guy that that they looked up to, and be the guy that I knew they were. Live up to their honor and memory. I was just I went and saw he was a lieutenant in our company. When that was Friday, drove up there, ate some meat. Talked about old times. Mostly that deployment. Who we lost, and had a toast to them. Just kind of shooting the breeze. Yeah. Memorial weekend, it sucks. Because like I was communing with the ghost last night. That takes special communion juice to do that. So
Yeah. So for me, one of the things that I've talked, like I said, I've mentioned some of the stuff in my newsletter. I try to share the Army stories where possible. I try to keep the private and personal stuff. Like those are my
yeah,
stories for whatever. Like some of those just I won't share. They're raw, they're personal, and some of them I do because I feel like they illustrate a larger point. Names have changed to protect the wicked, and
yeah,
that was us. Because let's face it, there's nothing more irreverent and sinful in nature than a hyped up 18-year-old knuckle dragon, freedom
then
fighter.
nothing worse. Nothing's more dangerous than a bored grunt, as my platoon
Yeah,
sergeant
and
used to say.
I had to say I was the old man in my fire team, and so for me, a fire team was actually squad length, just because the fire team was by the number of vehicles. So three
Right.
gun trucks, but they're 3-man crews on each truck, so I had 8 people at any given time that
Yeah.
worked for me. So by any other standards, I'd have been a squad leader, and I was considered the old guy at 22.
Oh Jesus.
And now I look like one of the E7s that we deployed with that didn't make it home. Like we thought he was freaking ancient, like he was a dinosaur, and he was 39 when he died. I'm like, that shit passed me a couple years ago. And I look at that and like it kind of reminds you how fleeting it all is.
Yeah. It goes by quick too.
It does. And so I try to that's one of the things that I talk about. Like I go out of my way to be positive to people, the positive affirmations, because the last thing you want is the last words you ever say to someone to be something douchey. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. You don't try to treat everybody with respect.
As a
Just in
general
case.
rule, like I'll still lay into it when it's necessary, but as a general rule, for people that I would consider part of the inner circle, like I go out of my way to make sure, like even when I'm like pissed off at them, like the last thing that if something happened, if they got sucked up by aliens, struck by lightning, whatever, I don't want that last thing we said to each other to be something unkind.
Yeah, we had a kind of like a rule in our platoon. We had a couple of rules actually, but like even if you had beef with one of your teammates, you end it with a handshake. I don't care how mad or pissed off you are. You can still be mad at each other, but end it with a handshake. Especially some of the missions we were getting. I was lucky to not lose anybody that I was in charge of. The closest I came, we had a Humvee flip, and the gunner was trapped inside. It's like the what was it on top of the turret? Those little fucking guard shield things. Trapped his head into the ground, and then because it flipped over a culvert, so there wasn't a whole lot of water coming, but when that Humvee flipped and went upside down, it loosened something up, and water was starting to get towards him, so he was like at risk of drowning. That was probably the closest we ever got. So we took some chains and hooked him up to 3 Humvees and like pivoted it just enough for us to get in there and get him out.
Yeah, we had you and I have had this conversation about the overlap in our service when we didn't even know each other yet.
Yeah.
But when you were operating near the Tigris and then later the Euphrates, providing overwatch for those areas, because when I was there, Route Irish was still the deadliest place on earth.
Yep.
And we knew that there were snipers countering their snipers. We just didn't know it was you because, they just need to know for certain things. And I wasn't important enough. But it's one of those things where, like, you really appreciate the little moments. We actually had we were doing this an old pontoon bridge, and I don't even remember if it was the Tigris or the Euphrates. I just remember it was a metal bridge that swayed like hell when we were going over it, and we actually had a vehicle roll over. And I'm surprised that guy didn't glow when he got out, because those rivers were not the cleanest.
Oh yeah, they were gross.
Yeah,
they were gross.
But
You see dead animals floating in there, dead people. At any given time, at any point on that river, it was like it's almost like the Rio Grande. The Rio Grande's like that. Just glows at night. It's toxic.
Yeah. It's
super gross.
Yeah, I think actually for me, like the hardest part was not everyone that engaged in combat over there against Allied forces was what we would consider an adult by Western standards.
Oh, absolutely not.
And that was the hard part for me, was like realizing that. And so when they were throwing, they started throwing like softball sized rocks at convoys from overpasses and stuff while we were there. And we were authorized, if we saw that in their hand, to treat it like a weapon and light it up. And I remember my harsh introduction to combat leadership, as I said, hold off, because they're kids, right? Like, we grew up in the West, we protect the women and the children, right? I mean, there's a reason on the Titanic the women and the children went in the life raft first, right? It's just our way.
Yeah.
And so I said, hold fire, and he didn't make it as a consequence of that. And I've years of therapy, and survivor's guilt's a bitch, but like, it's one of those things where you have to realize that given the information you had at the time, would you have made the same decision?
Right.
Probably. And so, like, that for me, it's honoring those people that made those sacrifices, because they'd have done the same for us. And so one of the things that I think, because we don't want this to be a long episode, just look for the normally aired episode that would go today will be airing on Wednesday. But one of the ways that Nick and I always say that if you want to honor their sacrifice, like, live a life that's worth living, that's worth defending.
Yeah.
Be the legacy that they never got to have.
Make it mean something.
Make it mean something. Because they gave up a lot for us.
They gave up everything. So
and I know, like, the war was not a popular thing. I know people had some opinions. Some of them were jerks, and they took it out on the Joes that signed the dotted line before 9/11, and it's not like they signed up to go. That doesn't take anything. I actually have much respect for people that enlisted knowing there was a war on. But I mean, you're taking out policy that happened at a governmental level, echelons above anything we had any control over, and took it out on those guys. And to me, one, you're a douchebag and I'll hate you forever. But for everyone else, like, you honor their sacrifice and what they knowingly did by making it mean something.
Yeah.
In spite of what you think of the individual war efforts, because that's something you can affect that by who you vote for, but that's not something the man on the ground ever has a say over.
I was asked that, like, when we got back, they made us, took a handful of us, and they always think it's funny to put me in those situations. So NPR wanted to do an interview with us, with a couple of guys from the 184. And one of the questions was, I think it was supposed to be, seemed almost like a gotcha question. or they were fishing to get that kind of gotcha. It's like, well, what do you think about the politics of war? And I'm like, well, I'll every soldier that's ever fought a war doesn't care about the nation's politics. They care about their own politics. They're like, well, what do you mean by that? I'm like, my politics were get me and my dudes home alive. That was it. We were just there fighting each other. We had a job to do. We did the job. I'm not over there like using government party talking points while I'm in a firefight. No, it's like, hey man, shoot, move, communicate, close with and destroy the enemy. That's the only politics we cared about. The politics of war. So it was stuff like that. And then they made me have dinner with Nancy Pelosi too, because they thought it would be a gas, to put me in that situation. And that's a story for another time, but she did end up having to leave the table. I was a little too honest.
So one of the things that I've have, and then we'll wrap this up because we've got more ghosts to visit, but
we do.
When I was in an IRR composite unit, which means the unit flag was is a guard unit out of Virginia, but everyone was from all over. It was literally, we just coalesced under a number at Fort Dix to do the pre-mobilization training and like unit cohesion stuff before we shipped for my second tour. And because the unit was from out of Virginia, we bought a bottle of Virginia Gentleman. It's a bourbon that's made, it's rebrewed locally. And we didn't open it. We were going to open it when we all got home. Yeah. And of course, that didn't happen. So I kept it thinking, the survivors would. And before, in pretty quick succession, they either redeployed and didn't make it home, or they ended it themselves. And so, it's like, holy shit, I'm the last one. So I kind of see it as my sort of sacred honor to keep their memories alive, to tell their stories. Yeah. But I've decided I'm looking for a reason to break open that bottle to remember, because they couldn't. So that's sort of been, I realized I let myself, when I thought about the war, go so dark that I wasn't, a new therapist, sort of a new light on things helped, but I realized I wasn't living up to what they gave up. Yeah. Like doing it that way. Not to say like I was being a jerk or anything like that. Just I wasn't going that extra mile for them. So that's been my goal for this year, is to do better for them, to honor what they gave. So got any closing thoughts on this one? Because we promised a short one.
Yeah. There was a few times, you talk about how dark it gets as the years go by, and you're not only are you remembering the ones you lost over there, the ones that never came home, but then the guys that lost the fight years after we even fought. So just my own personal responsibility and my own personal ideology on it is I don't have the right to quit. I lost that luxury when those guys died. I don't get to quit. I got to keep going. I got to keep going for them. I got to keep going for my family. Got to keep going for my friends. So, that's all I got to say about that, I guess. My little Forrest Gump moment.
And so some of the episodes we've recorded recently haven't aired yet, but Nick and I are trying something a little different. I don't know if you guys follow Cisca on her profile, but she recently closed on a new house. So that's where she's been. She has been doing the move as a single parent. That is not easy.
No, it is not.
So Nick and I, while she's distracted, mostly because when she's on the shows at night, she's like literally been up for almost 14, 15 hours because she works full time, gets up early, and then stays up late to accommodate our guests. And so while she's recovering, we've been trying to do something a little different. So we're trying to mix up not just author interviews, we're trying to do talks with each other about topics. And so we've gotten a little bit more raw. Like there are lines we still won't cross, but I definitely think it's worth checking out. I think the very first one we recorded in that new vein was the Comics Ain't Just for Kids. And I'd say probably the first half of it was just us reminiscing about life, the army, the war. So if that kind of stuff, if you like to hear those stories, start there. I think it'd be a shame if they weren't heard. And look for more of that kind of stuff from us as well. because like we'd like to evolve past just being a host for other authors to talk about their books. We've got our own products we hawk. We do some charity work. I know Nick and I have been involved with getting some money raising outside of what Galaxy's Edge does with the Mission 22, which is the veteran suicide organization. And so, look for new and different things in addition to the things you love about the interviews. And lastly, we are working on trying to do a little bit more ad-libbing on those interviews. So do the introduction, because that's how you get to know them. And then to the greatest degree possible, let them just talk about the book. And then, we'll add in as possible or as needed, but we're not going to do as formulaic, because like we realized when we just let the authors, that got the gift of the gab, if we just let them loose, they did all the work for us and we had
Those have
fun
been some of
times.
our best and most fun interviews, is when we just kind of take the leash off of them.
Yeah. So that's the plan going forward. So in lieu of our normal closing routine, you know where to find us. We put it in the show notes. We say it every week. So instead I'll say, check out Wednesday's episode. It was a good one. We delayed it because we just thought that it was the best way we could to release this to honor our friends. We actually are recording this on Sunday evening. I will be launching this tonight as soon as it's ready, so you have it to listen to. So if you're listening to this on Memorial Day, I just ask that you raise a glass to the ones that didn't make it home. Yeah.
Yep.